we're so privileged. Is this the first public presentation you all give on FIN6?
It is. Yeah, this will be the first public
gosh.
presentation outside of the center. Absolutely.
That is amazing. I'm sure the listeners on here, we have almost 1,000 people on. So not to give you any pressure or anything, but
Right.
first public presentation of the new FIN6 emulation plan, I think deserves some call outs. That's awesome. So how long have you all been working on this FIN6 emulation plan?
Yeah, good question. So we'll obviously jump into it here in a minute, but MITRE kind of realized that, I mean, if we were in like a real room, right, you're like, who's heard of MITRE? And maybe because of MITRE attack, there's more hands up in the like cyber infosec community that would say yes than used to, right? But for a long time, no one had heard of MITRE outside of government circles. There was an article something like 8 years ago in a DC magazine that was like, MITRE, one of the most interesting companies you've never heard of. So we kind of took that to heart, right, in the cyber infosec space, because we were doing a lot of really interesting work, but no one was aware of it. And if people aren't aware of it, if we're not getting it out to the community, then there's really no impact, right? It's not helping. I mean, it's helping the government for sure, but there was a much broader, I think, application that could have been had. So I know you're super aware, but just really the beginning of this year, we stood up this capability called the Center for Threat Informed Defense. Still a not-for-profit, still doing things in like a maximizing the good for kind of the global community that MITRE was founded on, but in this case, really letting us work with industry to partner on some hard-hitting infosec challenges, both on the adversary emulation side, the detection side, hardening environments, and then letting us public release those results. So that really, the center just really started off at the beginning of this year, and FIN6 actually was the first project that we kicked off and also the first one to be completed. And so we started it really in the kind of spring timeframe, the February, March timeframe, and then didn't wrap it up and have it ready for public release until September. So we're hoping we get these a little quicker going forward. We had a lot of lessons learned in FIN6, but we're excited that it's out there. I know kind of watching the GitHub repo, we're seeing people start to use it, and definitely awesome hearing shout outs like in the previous talk. So I hope people are already taking a look at it. And if you haven't, maybe after this talk, take a look. We're definitely interested in your feedback. We want to make sure it's really the best plan it can be for FIN6. And then any lessons learned out of FIN6, we're kind of moving forward to build a whole library of these plans on that same GitHub repo. So anything we learn now and fix, we're going to flow into those future plans. So any feedback we get will just make everything better in the future.
That's awesome. No, yeah, we're super excited. I don't know if you know, actually, I worked at Citi for 10 years, and I was actually the lead working with Richard and John Baker there, and I've become one of the founding members. And then I left right around February and March when we were saying, hey, let's do FIN6, let's be a sponsor for it. And then I left, so I didn't hear anything until it got released, and I'm super excited about.
Hopefully that's not a bad sign. You heard about the FIN6 thing and you bailed. Hopefully it was
well, I was the one pushing, right? Because as a member of the center, I'm sure you'll talk about, like, you get a number of projects, ideas, and you get to like choose which ones you want to be a part of. And since I was the one leading it, I'm like, yeah, definitely an emulation plan, because I like adversary emulation. But yeah, this is awesome. Let me intro you both real quick. Forrest and Justin are with MITRE, which I think all of you have heard of and know of, right? FIN6 presentation will be given now. I think Forrest, you've been with MITRE for what, 4 years now, something like that, a little over that?
Yeah, just awesome. Crossed 4 years. It would have been 5, but I took a brief adventure back onto one of the DoD red teams, and then came back to MITRE actually. So just crossed 4.
That's awesome. How about you, Justin?
Yeah, I've been with MITRE for just a little over a year now. I came from DoD as well.
That's awesome. Well, I will let you all do your presentation. Thank you all for being here. I am totally looking forward to this. So I'm going to get off camera and let you all do your thing.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'm going to go ahead, Justin, throw out to you, since I'm going into full presentation mode here with the slides, I'm going to count on you to watch Discord and jump in anytime there's any like question or whatever we want to address it while we're going through the presentation. Do that for me, because I'm apparently technically challenged so that I can't see Discord while I got these up. So just do me that favor. And for everybody, man, just thank you for the chance to be here. Thank you for the invitation from the team putting this together, from the Hackin team. We're excited to be here. And like I said a second ago, really powerful for us from MITRE, and we're really excited about it to take a lot of the lessons learned, the best practices that we've had, kind of focused around the government space, and get those out into the real global InfoSec community. I mean, it's been awesome for us knowing that we've been having really targeted impact in the federal government in the U.S. But really taking all that knowledge and broadening it out so that everyone kind of has the benefit of it, and honestly, so that we can get community feedback, so that it's not just in that government bubble, but we're getting feedback from the entire community, is powerful for us, so that we can keep improving. So yeah, got that good intro there up front. Just summarizing, we don't have an intro slide today, but Justin and I and Shane, who's on the slide with us, he may be able to pop in here, but all come from the DoD space, the DoD Red Team community. My time in the government, I bounced around a little bit. I'll be honest. I did some in the kind of vulnerability assessment, penetration testing world. Did some other interesting things in special operations, and then in the cyber mission force, and then kind of came to MITRE, bounced back, like I said, to a DoD Red Team, and then came back to MITRE working on the adversary emulation and kind of defensive cyber operations, detection engineering. And Shane and Justin both came out of that community too. So we're excited to be here and talk to you about FIN6. I briefly mentioned this just a second ago, but just I'll go over it a little bit. So the Center for Threat Informed Defense, it's a new thing MITRE's doing, separate from MITRE proper, right? And the Center for Threat Informed Defense, it keeps our same mission, that it's like for the public interest. We're not for profit. We're not monetizing or commercializing any of the work. It's just R&D. But the big difference is that we're doing R&D driven by our partners and our founders, like City, right, and like others. We'll get to that in just a second. And they're kind of collaboratively as a community coming together, saying we think these are the big problems, and we want MITRE to go do R&D on these. And then when we solve it, or when we come up with a prototype or a proof of concept, we're going to release that to the whole global community for impact, but also to get your feedback, so that we can iteratively improve over time. So the center's main focus is to take the cyber threat intelligence, or we use the term threat informed, right? But this heavy reliance on cyber threat intelligence to inform all the rest of the work that we do, so that it's relevant to the real APTs that are out there. It's relevant to their targeting. It's relevant to their TTPs. And, based on that, you can clearly see there's probably a tight coupling to the attack team, right, and to the attack project. And there absolutely is. And so our work is just like it was just laid out, that it's a set of projects. There's proposals for projects that could come from MITRE, that could come from any of our members. And then together we kind of agree on which ones are the biggest priority, which ones are going to really impact the community. And then together we execute those. So that's kind of the background. And on the center, we do have those kind of founding research partners. And absolutely, you got Bank of America there, Attack IQ, and then JP Morgan and Verizon. But then you've also got City, you've got Splunk and Fortinet, right? So we got Microsoft, and I'm not trying to call it any specifically on purpose. The goal here is that it's this cross section of the community. We have breach and tech kind of simulation capabilities. We have people that build EDR solutions. We have Microsoft that kind of runs the gamut. We have Splunk on the SIEM and detection side. And then even as you may have seen, we're kind of moving into more of the ICS research area. We've got Siemens on board to help make sure that we're doing the right things in the research we're doing around ICS. So it's a cross section of the community, and it's growing every day. And we're excited for that input. And again, it's a whole new perspective for us to look at it from the commercial and the global community, and not just the federal government space. So let me pause really quick just to see, did Shane get on?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, cool. Let me press forward. So the FIN6 project was focused, maybe intuitively, right, on FIN6. So the community got together, and we wanted to prove the concept of adversary emulation planning, and we were looking for an APT to focus that around, and there was consensus. You see that there's a lot of research participants in the center that are from the financial services sector, and so we picked FIN6, and we wanted to just use that as a proof of concept. Some pretty good reporting on FIN6. The CTI was out there, and also just from a kind of like crawl, walk, run, right? We didn't want to do a whole lot of custom tooling and custom dev right out of the gate. And so FIN6, in terms of their operations, use a lot of commodity malware. So the ability to put together a quality emulation plan based on the CTI was pretty straightforward. And we were able to do that, again, without having to do a lot of heavy dev, at least for this first plan. So we were focused on our methodology. We were focused on the components of an emulation plan, kind of the format we wanted to release. and getting all of that right. Because again, this is the first one, but it's also helping us build out the templates for what we're going to use as we go forward. So you see that our goal for the FIN6 project was not just to publish FIN6, but to develop a reusable adversary emulation library, a kind of set of templates that will repeat, and then ultimately building out this entire library. And so it was sponsored by 4 center participants, and those participants provided us everything from CTI input. They collaborated with us with their red teams. In some cases, they collaborated also with their blue teams and their SOC detection teams. One of the participants provided the test range so that we had a pretty realistic enterprise simulated range that actually included EDR and some other things like that, so we could capture detection metadata and things of that nature. And then through the entire process, right, each of those participants was giving us kind of technical feedback on, hey, we don't really like the format of this markdown implementation, or we think you missed something in the Intel summary, or, you know, when we get to it, to the YAML piece, you know, they helped us do a lot of the technical parsing of the YAML and making sure that that format was right. And so as we deep dive into FIN6, it's going to be exciting to go over that with you. Please ask any questions you have. You can tell us if you've already looked at it, things you didn't think were right, things you think we need to fix, or if you've already taken a look at it and think it was good. Any and all feedback is welcome, because certainly we've got 4 or 5 additional plans kind of in planning. We're already doing the next one. So the better and quicker that we get input will help us improve. So for adversary emulation plans, I know this just came up in the last talk, so I don't want to like repeat things that were already said. But the whole goal here was that we wanted to be able to really enable easy and accessible purple teaming for the entire community, right? And I want to say right off the bat that building an adversary emulation plan, it does not replace a red team, right? It doesn't replace a creative human operator or those kind of like nuanced cognitive discussions that you get into when you're actually in an environment trying to do a compromise, right? So and the initial feedback we got from some of the red teams, I think that was the perception, like, oh, you're replacing the humans, you're trying to make it, you know, check the box, or you're trying to automate it, and that's just simply not the case. What we're trying to do here is to empower the entire community to test and tune defenses, because, you know, kind of reflet stomp, it's the Center for Threat Informed Defense. So the goal for us is that ultimately everyone's defenses are improved, not just like furthering the red team adversary emulation kind of community. So the defensive aspect is our goal, but we want to do that using real adversary behaviors. And so the goal of building adversary emulation plans is, number one, is we public release these and they're out in that repo, that they're globally accessible. And you know, some of my recent work has been with organizations that support the DoD. I'm helping them improve their cyber defenses, and that's on the government side. And in going to those organizations, we've been to places as small as 10 employees and companies as big as 40,000 employees. And certainly when you look at like the small, medium business sector, you see that they don't have a lot of capital to throw at cybersecurity. They don't necessarily have the funding for a lot of full-time staff. And if you make the barrier of entry too high, they really don't even know how to get started. And I think that was an excellent discussion in the previous talk. Yeah, how do you even get started here? And so our goal is that these be widely and broadly accessible to organizations of any size, so that they can get started dipping their kind of toes, if you will, into adversary emulation, but also doing so in a really highly faithful way to the CTI, right? And I even, I'm going to be honest, was initially had some critique of the concept of spending too much time being highly focused on like really niche adversary TTPs or niche capabilities, because I was worried we'd get so focused on emulation and so perfectly emulating a specific adversary that we'd lose the focus on defense. And we all know that adversaries, they innovate all the time, right? What they did yesterday is not really indicative of what they're going to do tomorrow. And so I didn't want us to get so far down the rabbit hole that we were kind of like telling you, hey, you're going to be perfectly defended against FIN6, when really that's not the case. The value here for us is that if you want to think of like the attack framework or vulnerabilities in your environment as like windows and doors to your house, that you do eventually, right? You want to lock all the windows, you want to lock all the doors from a security perspective. But by really founding this on cyber threat intelligence, what it empowers you to do is to use them, is to go out and lock them right in a priority order. So, you know, maybe your downstairs windows matter before your upstairs because you know that APT doesn't have a ladder, right? Maybe you know that they're TTPs that typically come in the front door, not the back, so you're going to lock the front door and the front windows first. If that metaphor makes sense to you. It was to make sure that, yeah, eventually you want to go through your entire environment, but if you know your financial services, you probably want to look at what TTPs the adversaries use that are targeting financial services. And so by doing this, being highly faithful to the CTI, it lets you prioritize those TTPs. And so kind of the last bullet there is that it lets us operationalize the intelligence. So we want to assess our environments, and we want to enable other organizations to do the same using an entire scenario. I think especially on the blue team SOC side, we've all seen that like you're trying to write really good indicators, you're trying to write really good detections, and detection engineering can be hard. But it's really most impactful when you understand what came before, what came after, and a real adversary's kill chain. So by following these emulation plans, you don't just get kind of a TTP by TTP emulation, you get a true, very faithful to how that APT acts in the real world, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And so if you're going to use that to assess your environment, it's fantastic. But if you're going to use it to improve your defenses, your detections, it also gives you a really realistic set of data of what they do first and how they prep the environment, how they do lateral movement, how they persist, and how that all leads up typically in order, so that you can kind of write your detections that way, respecting how the adversary really behaves. Again, not overly focusing on it because we know the adversary innovates, but that was the mindset. And so when we talk about FIN6 specifically, just for those who aren't really tracking that actor, it is a cybercrime group that's been involved with a variety of campaigns, but specifically data exfiltration, so campaigns that kind of pillage victims and they're just looking to dump sensitive data, monetize that. And then in other cases, their campaigns have been kind of extortion focused, ransomware focused, trying to get those various ransoms paid after they've taken all that sensitive data and then encrypted it in the victim. So we've seen them do both, and the scenarios that we built as part of this emulation plan really reflect both. So this is where Shane would have been fantastic. He was our cyber threat intel guy for this. But in FIN6 in general, they're a financially motivated cybercrime group. They've gone kind of historically, you've seen them target actually both point of sale systems, but also most recently, you've seen them again, like I said, most focused on data exfiltration and also ransomware. They've also been kind of associated with Magecart Group 6, which is a cybercrime activity really going against e-commerce sites and doing skimming and things of that nature. Again, looking to kind of compromise, exfiltrate that financial information. And then not really a firm attribution on that, right? But they have been connected with them for a couple of years in public reporting. And so what that kind of indicates to us is FIN6's evolution over time, both their initial focus on point of sale systems, their new focus on data exfiltration that's still financially motivated, and then even potentially this associated activity with Magecart shows that they've stayed financially motivated the entire time. That's still kind of their ultimate kind of motivating premise, but that they have been willing to modify their TTPs to be successful as different environments have changed. And so in 2019, you see kind of the third paragraph down, we saw some additional reporting that showed that they were still going after organizations, but in this case, they kind of moved past organizations processing point of sale data. And so moving more forward to like more traditional enterprise compromise and data compromise and exfiltration kind of TTPs. And so getting down to target industries, again, historically, high volume point of sale systems, hospitality and retail sectors dating back at least 5 years. Also e-commerce sites, multinational organizations, mostly in the US and Europe, but also some additional countries as well. And again, most recently, this shift towards ransomware. So when you take a look at their operations, you see that on the slide there, that they've most likely been seen to do initial access using legitimate compromised credentials, but also legitimate remote access applications, and when needed, spear phishing. And if you go check out the Intel summary, you'll see that just like you see here, everything that we call out in the Intel summary, everything we call out in the actual emulation plan is directly linked back to the actual attack TTP. So you can deep dive into that TTP. You can look at, where is that TTP logged if it leaves evidence on a system, so that you can deep dive into it for kind of detection purposes. So we try to make sure, again, that those are highly coupled so it's intuitive for you as you use it to jump back and forth between the emulation plan and attack and get what you need, whether it's from an adversary emulation or a detection kind of perspective. And you also note, if you've all been paying attention to attacks, I'm sure most people have, that we have formally moved to the new sub-technique approach, no longer even calling it sub-techniques, we're just calling it attack. But you get a lot higher fidelity in the sub-technique approach. So if you look at those unique identifiers there, like 1566.001, the entire Intel summary and the emulation plan is linked at that sub-techniques level, so it's pretty precise. So this is kind of the Intel summary that laid the foundation for who FIN6 is, who they're going up against, who they're targeting and why, and what TTPs and tooling do they use. And so from that, we kind of jumped into the emulation plan itself. So these were the big questions we wanted to answer. Who are they? Why should people care? What does FIN6 do? And again, what TTPs and tooling are going to be included in the plan? And we were able to draw all that out of the intelligence. Justin, I'm going to go ahead and jump to you here for the emulation plan.
Thank you, Forrest. So as Forrest was mentioning with the overall emulation plan, it's kind of broken into different segments. So the Intel summary is more or less the overall story of how FIN6 has evolved, what their operations are, objectives over time. Because as you look at the available cyber threat intelligence, you can see that their operations haven't just remained the same. They constantly evolve depending on circumstances. For instance, especially with the just explosion of ransomware lately, that's a huge monetary advantage that they have. Going from the intelligence summary, the next logical step in the emulation plan is what we call the operations flow. That you'll see here on the left of the slide is basically just a graphical representation of what FIN6, their operations, how it's laid out. You have essentially what you would have similar to like a pre-attack stage there at the top. And then the rest of the plan is broken down into individual phases. The phase one being kind of enabling operations, objectives that kind of set up for either exfiltration of just reconnaissance data and so on, or even leveraging that to jump into like phase two for the three distinct scenarios that you see there. So we have the point of sale system. That was kind of FIN6 bread and butter to start with. You had credit card compromises, high volume point of sale. And then from there, you started having different attacks that were e-commerce, that you kind of like Newegg and British Airways and so on, that are kind of attributed to FIN6, and also most recently ransomware, LockerGoga, and so on. So basically, you can see with the op flow here, we basically like Forrest had mentioned, we wanted to kind of break it down to where it mapped directly back to attack, as far as especially with the tactics. So when you look here, you see the initial access, discovery, credential dumping, and so on in phase one, and then the same with phase two, how we've broken it out there. So then when you get a little bit more granular, you start breaking that out from the individual tactic into the techniques and procedures. So here you'll see with step two, we have the tactic, and then you break that down into the sub steps, I guess if you could say, of like 2.1, 2.2, and so on, where you have the tactics, then broke down into techniques, and then the individual procedures for FIN6. So the nice thing here is we're able to take this and be way more granular than just kind of giving you a high-level overview of FIN6 operations. We can kind of, especially with the markdown here, the intention here was for it to be a human-readable source where red teams, emulation teams can come in here and just do one-off, kind of ad hoc attacks, go through here one line item at a time. And so you'll see there are multiple steps in each of the phases, and we kind of just make sure that it's kind of a linear path until we get to phase two. And once we get to phase two, that's where you can break off, kind of have your own choose your adventure, kind of what is pertinent and what is relevant for your organization. You want to make sure it's some organizations, especially retail, have a very high interest in, hey, let's focus on the point of sale attacks and replicating that, and trying to see if our defenders can see what we're doing when we run through these emulation plans. And then eventually you also have, you have, especially now, and it being a very high threat to many industries, is the ransomware, which is the most recent that we've seen in the threat intel. So we just wanted to make sure that we could kind of present this in an easy readable format, human readable. We have the overview, the graphical representation with the operations flow. We have the human readable markdown that is intended for teams to go through, but also moving forward, next slide, please. We basically broke it down into an automated format for machine readable in YAML. So the intention here is for it to be more or less a mirror image in most fashions, to where this would mimic the human readable that you saw in the markdown, and basically present the exact same thing for machine readable to be parsed into an automated framework for adversary emulation. essentially you'll see here, this looks very familiar if anybody's done deep dives into especially like Caldera, into MITRE Caldera or Atomic Red Team. You'll see that we kind of wanted to jump in with something that was familiar with folks. We didn't want to just say, hey, let's just create something brand new, fully customized. Nobody's ever seen it before. And this made the most sense. We were just like, hey, let's stick with what works. Let's look at doing something people are familiar with, such as Caldera or Atomic Red Team. So you'll see that a lot of this is very similar. This is just a small excerpt out of the YAML. Technique and attack ID and name and so on, that's mirror image of Caldera. And then we have a few custom fields that are in there, such as CTI source. Like Forrest had mentioned, that was one of the most important things for the emulation, was that everything was rooted and grounded in available cyber threat intelligence. And because obviously we're not trying to make our own attribution, to FIN6, we're trying to go off what was already based and available out there. And then under that, you'll see the procedure group. This is just simply a way for us to kind of logically group each of the different each of the different tactics under attack. And then the procedure group. This is one of the main things that mirror images the markdown. So when you remember the steps, when we're looking at the markdown, the procedure step in the YAML is exactly what ties that back. So you could hold these side by side and say, okay, well, 5.1 here and 5.1 over here in the markdown. Okay, and you can see more information and so on in the markdown that explains exactly what's happening in the YAML. And so that's the overall plan itself. We've essentially just tried to make sure that we can have this in a modular approach to where it's like, okay, hey, do you want to automate this? Do you want to have your teams run through it step by step with the markdown? Do you just want to learn a little bit more about FIN6? We've done a lot of work as far as pulling all of the intel sources together and compiling that the threat intelligence into one spot into that intelligence summary, which is that the intelligence summary provides a great deal of information. And so basically all of that's tied back to there. Also, just to go into a little bit more detail on the intelligence summary, I meant to mention this earlier, there are several sections in the intelligence summary that you'll see that you even have the attack navigator layers. So to FIN6, you can go in there and you can also see all of our sources that we've referenced at the bottom, and which is a very important component. So with that being said, I'll pass it back to you, Forrest.
Yeah, so hit a couple of things. Justin, great job. And I hope this all made sense to everybody. If not, yeah, please throw some questions out there on Discord. I'd be glad to address them now, or we can address them at the end. But so if you take a look here, everything Justin said, totally accurate. So the human readable kind of markdown implementation directly mirrors the YAML. They tie together. And then, like I said, we wanted to have everything super closely coupled, both with attack. And so you'll see both in the human readable plan, but also in the YAML implementation. You get the attack ID. So that for every single step, everything that you're going to ever execute on a host, right, it's all directly linked back to attack, and it's directly linked back to the intel report that says, yes, the APT is known to do that. So that's number one, right? What I said up front, this whole thing is founded on this really solid CTI foundation. So we think we hit the right balance between being able to confidently publish this and say, hey, this is FIN6, and it not just be super generic, right? Like, they use spear phishing. Like, okay, great. So does everybody else. So we wanted to make sure that it was nuanced enough that it was unique to FIN6, both the actual logical op flow, the overall scenario, like what are they trying to target, stuff like that. But it's not so nuanced to FIN6 that it's worthless, as soon as tomorrow happens and FIN6 innovates a little bit. So we think it's the right balance, but would love feedback on that from the whole community. The other piece is, if you take a look, and George said this up front, so I want to hit it on a couple things. So number one, if you look at the plan, you're going to see a variety of tools used during execution, and definitely some of those are quantity malware, like I said earlier. Some of them are just lol bins, right? So yes, exactly, right, you see here in this specific example. And so we also, just like for the Roundup here today, like, we're not trying to in any way be biased towards any specific tooling. We legitimately kind of give you up front in the intel summary, like, these are the tools they've been known to use, like validated in reporting. And so as much as possible, we did try to use the tools that they've been seen to use. But I mean, you're going to see things like, hey, they use Cobalt Strike, right? And in some cases, they use Metasploit. And it'd be really easy to look at the plan and be like, oh, wow, these guys use Metasploit. That's ridiculous. They must be noobs, right? And you're like, whoa, oh, maybe. I mean, I sometimes joke, I'm a product of Kentucky public schools, so I'm probably not the most elite hacksaw that ever existed, right? But that's the tooling they really use, right? And you use what works. So you're going to see Cobalt Strike out there. You're going to see Metasploit in there, all grounded in the fact that that's what FIN6 uses real world. And then once you get on host, you'll see in a lot of cases a lot more actual lull bins, just kind of native binaries that they're rocking. And so it should be pretty easy for everyone to follow. And most of it, one of our other goals was not just not preferring a certain tool, but we did want to make it, again, really widely accessible. So we tried, when we wrote this, to shy away from anything that required licensing, because we didn't want to write it only in one tool syntax. And then, if you were to read it, you're like, well, this is worthless to me unless I go pay for a license for insert tool X. So at least for FIN6, you see that we primarily provide how you would do it in Metasploit, because that is validated that they really use it, but also because Metasploit is accessible to everybody, right? And then if you look at each of the procedures in the emulation plan, you'll see that like we give you the Metasploit syntax, but then we have another kind of section in the markdown just below it saying, well, if you don't want to use Metasploit, here are some other alternatives, again, using tools that FIN6 has been seen to use. So you can roll through the entire base plan using Metasploit until you get on host, and then you're calling some specific binaries. But we do give you some other options like the Cobalt Strike syntax if you have Cobalt Strike. I just want to make sure that that's really clear to everybody, why we did it, why we picked Metasploit, why we shied away from some of the other licensed tools. And again, it was to make it as broadly accessible as possible. And then, if you want to look at it, you're like, hey, I use a whole different RAD, or I use an in-house set of tooling. Then if it's easy for you to just translate it from the syntax we gave you to your in-house tooling, obviously you can implement every single thing in your in-house tooling too. And you'll notice the same thing. So when you get to the YAML, I know it was awesome actually hearing Plextrack a second ago say that they were already taking a look at parsing this. That's awesome. So that's exactly what we wanted to hear from the community. So we wanted to lock in this template in terms of the YAML format, again, kind of inspired by two things, by our internal Caldera tool, which is open source, but also by Atomic Red, because it's pretty pervasive in the community. People are familiar with the Atomic Red format. And so we kind of merged the two, learned some things, figured out, okay, we can't perfectly just copy pasta both. We've got to make some choices here about Caldera format or Atomic Red format, and we're still taking feedback. There's some open issues on the repo for this, so we're still making a few tweaks to the YAML to get it right before we roll through the rest of the library. But ideally here, it's a pretty solid template, really inspired mainly by Atomic Red, so people should be familiar with it. A lot of parsers may already work, but very minimal editing if you need to tweak a current parser to ingest it. And we didn't want to write this in any way that, again, biased it towards any breach and text simulation tool, right? We wanted to just pick a vendor agnostic format that anyone could take a look at, anyone could build a parser for, and then even all the way down to the execution. You've got the full path, you've got the executable name. We kind of used our kind of pound curly brackets to show, if you need variables in there, so you can do a find replace on that with any specific, kind of BAS tool that you want to, if you have a different syntax for calling variables. But it should, in our hope, enable the entire community, if they're interested, to build a parser, to be able to ingest these plans into their BAS tool or in-house tooling. And then if you want to go the human readable route and have your red team kind of use it, or just be inspired by it and then kind of iterate on it, or if you want to automate it, you can go either route, and it should be widely accessible across really any organization, but also any tooling you may happen to have. And it should be equally useful both from a red team perspective, because you've got all the intel behind you. So if you were to roll through one of these scenarios, again, Justin described it really well, the whole choose your own adventure perspective, but plenty of justified kind of information from an intel perspective to say, this is exactly why we're doing this in this order. This really does represent this adversary. But if that's not why you're using it, if you're doing it from a detection perspective, what we like about it is it's repeatable, it's consistent. So if you're trying to test new detections, you're trying to test new alerts, or if you're trying to put mitigations in your environment, then you want to retest, it's really easy, either from a human perspective, to rerun the exact same thing, or to automate it and just rerun the exact same case, and then keep running it and keep running it. If you remember back to one of my first slides, so that you can use it to tune your defenses. from my kind of red team background, I want to say again what I said at the beginning, not trying to replace any red teamers, not trying to, say that emulation and or that automation is the only answer, but it's certainly valuable. And I think we all know that like keeping like super talented, highly trained red teamers is hard. It's a rarity kind of in industry, and then there's only so many people in the talent base. And I think we're all trying hard to like train up the next generation too. But so that's one piece, right? Sometimes you just need to use automation because you may not have capacity on your in-house red team to get the work done. And so you want to, in my mind, I've always wanted to focus my human assets on the really hard problems, the really kind of niche problems. And if there's something low-hanging fruit or kind of easy, then I'm going to want to use automation because it's more efficient. And then I think the other piece here is that there's things, even if you have a human red team, where it just makes sense to automate the easy stuff, right? The repeatable stuff, the data collection, getting SAA on the host, and then have your humans take action on it once you've done it. So I think just a really good case to even, marry the automation with the human, and the end result is pretty fantastic. So again, how to use these plans, I already kind of like jumped to this slide even without realizing it, but great for a red team. Use it as is, tailor it for your environment, execute the entire scenario, kind of pick one of your own adventures, or if you want to just focus on specific tactics to very specific TTPs, you can do any of that. You can go human readable and do it with your team, or you can parse that into a tool, kind of tool of your choice, and automate it. And then you can absolutely extend it with any additional data. That's one thing that we decided for the FIN6 plan. We didn't base it on any private CTI. We based it all on public CTI because we wanted to be able to public release it and give you all those intel sources. As we move forward, we're going to ask the participants that are within the Center for Threat Informed Defense if they do have any private intelligence, things they've seen in their environment. And if so, we're going to be asking them if they're willing to let that be public released, or if they have to redact it in some way to public release it, because the intel that's out there for some of these adversaries can be a little dated. It might be a little sparse on certain aspects. But sometimes I think we all know this, right? But sometimes our companies know from real world activity, we've got fresh intelligence on things that we're pretty sure is a certain actor. And so if we can get fresher, more up-to-date, more precise CTI, we'd like to be able to incorporate that into these plans if we can get it into a format that's releasable. But then also we're going to be careful that we're not adding CTI references saying that it's a certain APT if that attribution is kind of quirky. Even for one of the plans we're working on right now, there's some reporting that is new that says it's that APT, but they're basing that entire attribution off the fact that they used one tool and it's a widely used tool. So we kind of discarded that CTI report because it wasn't enough to prove that it was that actor. So anyway, we hope this is valuable. We hope it makes sense to you. This is the actual kind of plan itself. So you can hit the GitHub repo. That's the full up adversary emulation library right now. The only plan in there is FIN6. But again, we're working on one right now with the hope to release it by December or January. And then we have a plan for a couple more upcoming plans. And so we're going to, as long as the center participants think this is valuable, we're going to keep doing this. And we're trying to make sure it's a broad stroke too, right? So they're not just all financial services sector related, but that we're hitting APTs that are relevant to a variety of kind of industry verticals, so that it's not, overly focused only on one industry, and it's useful for kind of a broader set of the community. So that's the emulation library on GitHub. You've got a link there to the Medium post where we released the plan. There's another Medium post that talks about the overall library, and then contact information for us at the center if you want to give us feedback. You can hit us up by email, or you can directly throw issues out against that repo. But I know I've said this like 20,000 times, but I'll say it again. We really need your feedback. We want to know if this is useful. We want to know if the format works. We want to know if it seems relevant to you, or if there's anything we need to change. And we want to take as quick of action on that as possible to keep these plans relevant. So, George, really, that's it for us, man. That's our last slide. I want to say thanks again to you and to the whole Hackin Fest team. Thanks for letting us be here.
No, thank you. Thank you for coming. The first public presentation of the FIN6 plan. I think you came and gave it at the right venue, especially after that intro to adversary emulation. That referenced FIN6 and whatnot. And we've got a bunch of questions here. One's actually from Carrie, who on the Atomic Red team, probably the biggest contributor, I would probably say. Don't quote me on that, but she's awesome. She also has some workshops that are going on. And her question was, is there an automation framework provided or plan that can read the YAML as is and execute the commands according to what is specified in there?
Yeah, great question. So I guess two-part answer. One is we didn't really want to overly prefer one, and kind of in that vein, like the easiest for us to use for sure is Caldera because it's inside house and open source, but we didn't want to come and be very self-serving and be like, here's a plan, but you have to use Caldera to run it. So that's not our goal. But that said, we are working right now with the Caldera team. We just tested and the plugin works. So don't hold me to it right, but the plan is, but the next major release, which should be in 2 weeks to the public open source Caldera, will include a core plugin that immediately ingests these plans, and they're populated as adversaries in Caldera. So you could just open Caldera, it'll automatically behind the scenes ingest the plan, and you can click execute on FIN6. So for sure that'll be there.
So in Caldera, you can also create your own plans. So will it be able to create those manually created plans as well?
Yeah, so Caldera is still going to work just like it does today, right? You could go in and build your own plans. You could build a custom adversary. You could custom write your own abilities and executors if you want to use different binaries on disk or whatever. So none of that capability is going away, but just kind of as an additional capability, if you enable that plugin, it'll pull anything that's in that adversary emulation library. So not just FIN6, but it'll check that plan every time you initialize Caldera. It'll check the repo, excuse me, and it'll populate those adversaries as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then there was some other questions here that you mentioned, but just for completeness, they mentioned you kept saying Markdown, right? And I know you know what Markdown is, but can you tell others what is Markdown and what do you mean by the adversary emulation plan is also available?
Just insult the man.
No, yeah, no, that's totally solid though. So right, if you go, this is like if you will, the culmination of several years of like adversary emulation work, all the way back to like APT3 and stuff like that. In the independent evaluations, I don't really want to speak for Frank Duff, right? But Frank Duff runs this independent assessment of EDR solutions, and that was the first time we started even building adversary emulation plans, was to use those to do the independent testing of EDRs. But yeah, so for everybody on the line, if you were to look at our old releases, we released the emulation products in PDF, and the problem we found with that is like we public release them and then people had all these comments. We're like, oh crap, well now we need to go back and find the Word document. We got to update the Word document. We got to re-export it as PDF. We got to upload a new PDF. And you didn't get all that history on the repo either. So Markdown is it's just another language, right, that essentially renders web content as formatted text. But the cool thing about it is essentially it's like source code in the GitHub repo. So for all the human readable aspects, the Intel summary, the op flow, and the emulation plan, we posted that up as Markdown because as far as GitHub's concerned, it's source code and GitHub renders it. So you see the formatted text right in GitHub. But the other useful thing there is that if you were to throw an issue on the repo and then we change it, like, and it's just like, source line 31, you're going to see that in the entire history of the repo. So it also keeps us honest when you're opening issues and we're editing feedback. It's just way more accessible. We don't have to worry about regenerating PDFs. We can dynamically change it, and you get all that version history on the repo for kind of posterity. So for us, we thought that was a way better way to do it. Hopefully
yeah, no, that's awesome. I think you all made the right call of doing both Markdown and YAML as well. And the reasoning behind YAML, being a standard, at least for machine readable. You mentioned also that you want people to grab this YAML and parse it. And Adam Mancini, who I think is getting on shortly, actually just released a parser that goes from
there he is, right there.
JSON.
You called him and he just showed up. He's standing behind you.
Magic.
How are you doing, Adam? Adam, what happened? I heard that there was like a complete power outage in the West Coast or something.
Well, I can't speak for the entire West Coast, but in my area, there's a number of down power lines and fire, although I don't know if the fire was caused by the power lines or vice versa. So I've frantically found a place to sit and some internet a few towns over, which is great. But yeah, Forrest, I can't express how happy I am that the team put out the YAML, and especially using the Atomic Red Team formatting where it has the prereq commands and the prereq checks, because that just made it trivial to write even like a silly parser for it. And now we're all on the same page about like, oh, this is the explicit command you want to do for this explicit ID, and like go forth and have it work. And if you need to help have it set up on disk or whatever, there's a nice prereq command based on the atomic red team formatting, which is something that's great. I know one question that I had, and this is sort of like an industry question that is, everybody has different opinions on. So there's kind of a split decision about, okay, for one explicit command, maybe it's something that writes something to disk or exfiltrates something or what have you. You know, it's about aligning that one explicit thing to either a single MITRE attack ID tag or multiple, like an array of them. And I noticed that in the existing FIN6 YAML, everything has just one, right? This specific action has this one specific tag, full stop. But that's not always the case. You know, one command could perform all sorts of different attack IDs. So has the team discussed the future of that, either like an array of tags or what have you, or do you want to stick more with the atomic red team, this one thing for this one thing, and call it a day?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, for this one, it was just way more straightforward to do the one-to-one mapping. You're totally right. But even in we discussed this a little bit on a couple of different things, actually. So like in the YAML, it would be easy to make that an array field instead of just that string. And then you could go ahead and tag all the relevant techniques. For us, the other reason was we wanted it to stay within the tactic family, just from a logical perspective, as it followed that op flow. So if you were in like the lateral movement tactic, we wanted to make sure the command tagged a lateral movement TTP, right? So it was like, oh man, I tagged one way over here and like, you know, pick some initial access, although in some cases those may be similar. So you make a solid point, and we could go either way. Actually, just out of curiosity for you, would it substantially help you one way or another, or is it just because it would be more complete?
From our perspective, it has to do with completeness, right? And really the way that we think about it is, yeah, and I did like the way it was structured into phases. That was very cool. But if you think about the threat and all of the explicit steps and all of them in their entirety, if you were just to run them all and import all of the inherent one-for-one tagging, the, say, like attack navigator JSON you would spit out of the other side of that thing would be incomplete because it's not holistic. Many of the commands actually were some other attack IDs, and if you want that really nice, beautiful grid filling up layout, you would miss out on that unless you retroactively went and added that yourself. And so, from our perspective, it does have to do with completeness, and it's just one less thing a given operator has to think about while they're implementing that plan, whether it be automation or manual tactics.
No, that's awesome. No, that's great feedback, man. So I'll take that back to the team, but then you can do me a favor too. Drop that as an issue on my repo, and then you'll know when I close it out.
No, that's, again, I can't thank the team enough over at the center. Like, I love everything about open source libraries, about adversary emulation that are really explicit commands and not just fuzzy, like, here's an MD5 hash, right? It's so cool to see that being centralized and that being produced, and then all the great stuff that we can have out of the back of it with everybody, you know, doing PRs.
Well, I appreciate it. It's good to hear that feedback. Yeah, and honestly, we just saw a Slack message that hit me yesterday around lunchtime. We're like, look, there's a parser for this that maps it out to Attack Navigator. And we're like, 2 thumbs up. So, because we still haven't gotten a ton of feedback on it yet, so we weren't sure if people were seeing it, if they liked it, was it good, was it bad? So it's super encouraging to us that people thought it was at least worth writing a parser for. And it's good to hear the feedback from you directly too. I appreciate what you're doing on it.
Yeah, and just like we were talking here on Discord as well, like a lot of people when Attack came out, there weren't these tools to track this. So like everyone kind of built their own thing, and then of course you came out with Navigator, and then there's like the Detect project, and then there's this and Vector and all these other free tools. So like when we're building stuff, we just have to integrate with them all because every customer like kind of grew into it, you know? So yeah, I think definitely standardizing all this. And I have another more thought-provoking question here when we talk about cyber threat intelligence. Do you see cyber threat intelligence providers, we are starting to see them map to MITRE ATT&CK, but we know that's at the technique level. Do you see them getting and evolving to a point where they start mapping and providing a machine readable like IOC list at the behavior level with procedures in a machine readable language? Or am I just like asking for utopia here?
So that definitely sounds like cyber black magic, but I would take some if it was out there, right? So I'm not going to heavily speak on the CTI side because that isn't my thing, and I wish my buddy Adam that runs our attack team was here, right? Because he gets all the inundations from the CTI providers at the attack email address and goes through those. But I would say that for sure, MITRE, I think maybe not our official position, but it would be nice to see CTI evolve to that machine readable state. I know when I go back to my blue team days, like even on the defense SOC time, and you're getting an intel report in a PDF, and you're like, well, what am I going to do with this? Now I have to read it, and somewhere in here is like IP addresses that I have to now manually copy and then paste. And you're like, well, this is kind of useful, but it also took me 2 hours to really do what I needed to from the PDF to actually see if it's relevant to my environment. So yeah, if it could be machine readable and I could directly ingest that through some tool and then push that into my SIEM and automate a query, like I said, that sounds like cyber black magic, but I'd get in on it. And MITRE definitely is a fan of that from like the Styx taxi format. We're definitely big fans of data formats for CTI. But I don't know, Adam, maybe you've got better senses of what's going on in the CTI community on that.
Yeah, and George was kind of reading my brainwave because I really, that's the holy grail, right? A threat intel organization providing not just, oh, well, this threat actor does user account discovery, and you're like, cool, how? And they're like, no, we don't, it's not, the command's not important. They just do it, right? And being able to make that jump from, we know that this threat actor does this, and here's an explicit example of how they do it. Like that is going to be an incredibly powerful thing when that sort of threat intel sees the light of day. And I don't know, I don't know if it's just that many threat intel organizations simply don't have this information because they're detonating things in weird sandboxes and they just don't know, or they don't collect it, or they don't feel like sharing it. But one day, I hope that will become more prevalent, and it'll be really exciting when it does, because then you, instead of get this blob of threat intel feeds where it's like, here's some MD5 hashes and IP addresses, go nuts, you'll actually see like, oh, not only is this some attribution information and some things you should block, but here's some really explicit commands that will run in this explicit order. And you should look for this too, right? And that, hopefully, I don't know if you all are seeing any sort of threat intel, but we've not seen a lot of that explicit nature yet. So here's hoping.
Yeah, I definitely call them out when I see them, right? Like US CERT sometimes does it, sometimes not. When they do, I tag them. I'm like, thank you, you mapped a MITRE attack. Yes, at least we know like the technique level. But I think
did someone mention threat actor? I thought I'd show up.
Hey.
Sorry guys, couldn't resist.
No, that's awesome. We love you, Joff. You always bring humor into the banter. Of course, we are in 10 minutes before our next talk and chatting up. And who is our next talk? I should look at the schedule and know
some guy. Don't know him.
Now you're talking about some cool stuff, right? Attacking your emulation in the age of endpoint detection and response. That sounds awesome. So yes, Joff is our next speaker.
Forrest.
You are, and you're next. So hopefully you did finish those slides that you were working on earlier today when we were talking. Always, we know you always going to deliver good things because that's kind of the reputation you've set here, Joff. So not trying to bring any pressure on you before you talk, but
I think the last time I presented, did anybody remember when I did a thing on IPv6 and it's time to transition? I don't know if any of you guys were at that talk, but
I guess people didn't listen to you.
They didn't listen at all, right? But I tried to pack my entire career worth of knowledge into 1 hour segment, and I think everybody's brains exploded. But I'm sure they restudied the presentation afterward. So I've been trying to resist that urge, but I still think I might have too many slides. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I think we'll be okay. I think the audience is definitely loving what's coming in and all the knowledge being shared here, and a lot of free stuff, right? I think we've only talked about one tool for like 10 minutes that was not free, right? This adversary emulation plan for MITRE is free. Adam has been working on that parser that I mentioned to go from YAML to JSON. We also have at Scythe this threat emulation plan on GitHub. We have quite a bit of those there in JSON, again, giving back to the community. Threat Thursdays. We look through this stuff. So I don't know, like John says, who popped up, we're not really good at capitalism, are we? It's all
No.
free.
Well, but that also gets into, like, you look at the nature of, especially the traditional nature of the offensive community was always about like sharing. It wasn't the best sharing, but we always were about sharing. And it's cool that, you see the blue teams doing that too. And I think it boils down to any company you're doing business with. What are they doing to give back to the community as much as they possibly can in a meaningful way? And yes, I also want to make it very clear, I have in fact changed my shirt because Joff was wearing the exact same shirt. So I changed.
I was about to call him out on it, but he called himself out. So that's great.
No. I had to do that, but I also got to show off our new shirt that we're releasing for the fall collection.
Again, I got to step up my office, like, seeing my son's computer from virtual learning back here. And I probably got like something to change my 2-year-old's diapers over here. I don't have a sweet arcade, so I got to step my game up here.
Yeah, this is me attempting to like look professional. My son is like, "Oh my God, Daddy's a YouTuber," and it's like,
By adding an arcade is your attempt to be professional.
Yeah, that's it.
I was going to make all kinds of snarky comments about about memos on dress code or something, but anyway, I'm glad you didn't have to change shirt, John. I like the shirt.
I know I didn't.
I was really hoping you both came on video, saw you were wearing the same shirt, both left to change, and we're going to come back wearing the same shirt again.
The same shirt. That would have been awesome.
Oh, man, I was hoping for it.
That would have been the best. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all.
Oh well.
So, all right.
Thank you, guys. I'm gonna drop actually and go mind my 2-year-old, and I'm gonna rejoin so I can. Really interested in hearing what's going on in the EDR space. I don't get to see it very often, but that's going to be pretty cool. But I'll jump out, and Joff, good luck on your presentation. I tried to make sure I set the bar here, you know what I'm saying, so you could really smash it.
Well, we'll see what we can do.
Thank you so much on behalf of everyone watching. We really appreciate you coming and sharing.
Thank you, Forrest.
We look forward to the next one.